Okay, Purim, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice break. Um, so we're up to a new shaila, which is having to do with the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Matzah tabat yahalom b'makolet mizacha bal hamakolet om hamotze. You find a diamond ring in the store, in the makolet. Who is the owner? Is it the store owner or the finder? In other words, a guy finds a ring, there's no one to claim it or it doesn't have an adequate siman, and you can ascertain, let's say halachically, that the finder gets to keep it, because we can assume, like we've learned in the laws of Hashava Saveda, that the person who lost it had Yeush, or perhaps it was announced and no one came to claim it after a certain amount of time. So the question now is, who gets to keep it? Would you say that the storekeeper gets to keep anything that is lost, that is found in his store? Or does the finder get to keep it? Now, the finder is a good Samaritan. He gives the ring to the shopkeeper and he says, I found this in aisle 6. And I don't, it's not mine, but it looks pretty valuable. I think we should return it. And now the shaila comes up, no one's claimed it. Who gets to keep the ring? Okay. So that's exactly the shaila. Ruvain matzah b'makolet tabat yahalom chadasha she'ein basimin. Ruvain finds a new diamond ring that doesn't have a siman, which is a little surprising because you would think that a ring has a siman, but I don't know, for whatever reason, it says it doesn't have an adequate siman. Ubal hamakolet to'ein shehu zacha ba kevin shatabat nimtza'a b'chanut shelo. The storekeeper says, I should get to keep the ring because it was found in my store. Lemi hatabat migia l'reuven olabal hamakolet. Who gets to keep the ring? It is considered like a rishus harabim because well, you could say that it's his property. Normally, a person's property is kona things for him, right? So let's see. Obviously, there are going to be limitations to this rule. So anyway, Kasav Maran b'Shulchan Aruch Chatzero shel Adam Konelo Shalom Mida'ato. So the first thing we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch is that a person's property acquires items for him even without his knowledge. If something falls from the sky onto my property, a bird plops out from the sky or some other projectile falls on my property, it belongs to me if no one comes to claim it. That's only provided, however, that the area in which, my field is a protected area, is a secure area, which means that it's off limits to people from the outside. Aval ima chotzer ena mishtameres, but if it's not a protected field, imbal hachotzer omeid b'tzad hachotzer va'amar zachsoli chatzeri zacha. But if it's an unprotected area where people have free access to that area, so then it's only if the owner of the courtyard is standing at the side of the field while the object has fallen there and says, I hereby declare that my property has acquired this object for me. Aval im lo amar zachseli chatzeri lo kana. But if he doesn't make that declaration, then he is not koina by virtue of the fact that this is a completely unprotected area, and because everyone can pass by and through it, there's no special quality of his property to acquire the item. Uledas harama ein tzarich loymar zachseli chatzeri ela maspik she'omed b'chatzero ba'al yedei zeh zocha b'mitzia. Now, according to the Ramah, you don't have to make a verbal declaration. My chutzner is kona. My courtyard acquires. The fact that you're just standing there, cognizant of what is going on, is enough. Your presence is enough for you to acquire the object. No. Yeah, he may be at the cash register. Yeah, absolutely. So upashad hadavar shekol mash shanachnu omrim chatziro shel adam konelo zedavke bedavar she'ein bo siman. obviously, when we say that a person's courtyard acquires objects, it's only when it's something that doesn't have a simon, because otherwise he would have an obligation to return it to its rightful owner. So it has to be something that either is coming from Hefker or something that doesn't have a simon. Like if a kid throws a ball into your field, you can't say, well, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. If it has a simon, and you know that it clearly came from the kid down the block or on the other side of the street, so you would have an obligation to give it back to the child. Okay. Now, he says, "V'hinei kol makom sheyesh reshus livnei adam lihikanes l'sham, yesh lo din chatzer she'eina mishtameret." Now, let's establish halachically. And by the way, as the annotator says, you only acquire something in your property if it doesn't have a simon. He says, "Zeh pashut." That's obvious. The dafke kishein simenu mutter lizkos ba'aveda, because then and only then are you able to attain possession of something that falls into your property. L'chein bal hasada lizkos ba'av im yesh simen harei chayev b'hashavas aveda. But if it has a simon, you have to return it. Valkein pashut sha'asu lizkos ba'aveda la'atzma, and therefore your property can't acquire something for you that you don't have a right to keep. Ba'ayin b'shut or letzion shabir o degamkein lo omrim sha'achatzer tizka leba'olam kidei lihitchayev b'hashavas aveda. And also, as we don't say that my courtyard acquires it for me so that I can do the mitzvah of hashavas aveda. No, that we don't say that. Because since it's a big burden for me to have to worry about returning lost items, we don't say that automatically my courtyard sort of attains the rights of that object to fulfill the mitzvah of hashavas aveda. The only time that there's an obligation to return a lost object is if the finder picks it up. If something is on my property and I'm not yet aware that it's even there, then my property does not acquire it so that I can do the mitzvah of hashavas aveda. That doesn't take place, right? Okay. Now, v'hinei kol makom sheyesh reshus livnei adam lihikanes l'sham, yesh lo din chatzer she'eina mishtameret. Now, let's establish that if the public has rights of access to my property, then that's not called a guarded or secure property. If anyone can walk into my store and it's generally open to the public, then that's not called a chatzer hamishtameres, a guarded area. Now, this will have ramifications, I guess. Let's think about this. What if there's a security guard at the door and he vets people who come in and out? Well, let's see. The chol hamotze sham mitzia harei elu shalo. And therefore, anyone who finds a lost object in a store where the public has free access, then the finder gets to keep it. Adam shemotze mitzia b'chanus o b'ulam smachos harei elu shalo. Therefore, if a person finds a lost object in a store or in a social hall, right? Let's say, you're at a wedding and somebody, you find a piece of jewelry on the floor and it doesn't have an identifiable simon. Because let's say it's a loose diamond or a loose pearl or something like that. You probably still would have an obligation to make an announcement. We found this, and someone would have to sort of give a simon of some kind. It's hard to imagine how something like that would not have a simon, but I guess it's theoretically possible. If it's a mostly non-Jewish area, technically you're not obligated in Hashavas Aveda. But there's still, if you can make a Kiddush Hashem, you're supposed to. And therefore, even if the storekeeper or the manager of the hall or the owner of the hall is present, chatzero lo kona lo kevin shelo omer b'fiv shetikna lo chatzero, then in no way does his property, the floor of his store or his hall, acquire lost objects, because he has to be aware of it and be mindful of it at the time that it lands on the floor. So that's clear. Okay. So the annotator says, "V'nemru bazeh kama ta'amim lama bala chanus lo kana al yedei chatzera." So there are a number of reasons that are offered as to why this halacha is the way that it is, why the storekeeper doesn't acquire something just because it landed on his property. A Rambam kasav lefisha chanuti chatzer sheina mishtameres. The Rambam writes that that any kind of store is considered to be an unprotected, unsecured area. Begam lo amar shetiska lo chatzero, and the person didn't say, I want my floor of my store to acquire this lost object. Tosfos offers a similar reason. He says, your property cannot acquire something for you if you're not eventually going to find it on your own. Meaning, like, if things are, let's say a person, let's say something is, and this is another famous shaila, you sell your house and the new buyer discovers, when he does a renovation, that there was Action Comics #1 that was inside the wall. This is a real story, by the way. A guy found a very valuable comic book inside the wall, sealed inside the wall. So now that he's found it and it's announced in the newspapers, the seller of the house says, that's my comic book. So the question is, well, did you put it there? No. I didn't put it there, but my house is my property. It should be kona. It should acquire anything that's in the house. So there's an interesting halacha that no, your property does not acquire something if it was never in reasonably something that you would have found on your own. And so if it was something completely hidden from the owner, his property doesn't acquire it. V'gam kan yitachein shebal hachanut lo yimtza et hakesef hanal. And it stands to reason that the same argument holds here as well. That there's no reason why we would assume that the storekeeper would ever find such a thing that fell on the floor when there's so much foot traffic. V'ayin od b'shach shekasef b'shem harosh v'harash v'ba'od rishonim dahainu taima delo kana b'kinyan chatzim mishum delo samcha daite kevin derabim nichnasim v'yotzim sham. The language of these rishonim, for the Rosh and the Rashba, is that a person never entertains in his mind that his property will acquire anything, because he knows that the public is constantly walking in and out of his store, and that other people will pick up items before his property is able to be konaed for him. And therefore he doesn't have any sense of reliance on his property to acquire things for him. And that's true even if he's standing in the store. Because your physical presence, you the owner, your physical presence is ineffective if you can't prevent people who are coming in and out of the store from picking up items that they find. And in the case of a store, right, where you don't even know if there's something there, and there are also there's constant foot traffic, then there's no sense of reliance on your property that it's going to acquire anything for you. So there's different variations of language as far as how to explain this phenomenon, But if your store is open to the public and someone finds something lost, then you can't claim that your property acquired it. So he says, "V'nechlaku hatoisvis." The Rav Sharaga continues, and he says, "V'nechlaku hatoisvis v'harash im yesh b'chatzer din yeyu shelo midas u'v'isura asaliyade." Now, there's another question, which is this: when I find a lost object that's on the floor, may I assume that the loser of that object has already had yeush, has already given up hope of retrieving it? How do we assume? Well, it doesn't matter about time after I find it. If I pick something up from the ground before someone had yeush, so yeush shalomidas lo havi yeush. We assume that if the person didn't know about it, even when they do discover it, they may give up hope of retrieving it because they're going to say to themselves, forget it, it's gone. But the question is, are you allowed to keep it if you picked it up before that yeush actually took place? So you have to basically make a determination. Is it reasonable to assume that the person who lost this is aware that it's lost? So there's a machlokas between Tosfos and Rosh whether you can make that assumption. Diladas harosh lo adifa chatzero miyado. The kaven shem haya bali yado lifnei yeyosh bailim zechashiv yeyosh lo midas vaser lo liskosbo. Hu hadin im zebala chatzero yesh lo din yeyosh lo midas vaser lo liskosbo. According to the Rush, just like if you pick something up before Yeush takes place, you're not allowed to keep it. So too, if your property acquires something because you see it and you want to acquire it on your property, if it's before Yeush, then it's usher for you to keep it. Amnam hamarshal kosa b'das hatoisis shebechatzer lo amrim din Yeush shelo midas. But according to the Maharshal, trying in his explanation of Tosfos, we don't say that your property is like picking it up. Something lands on your property, and let's say it's a protected area, but you don't know about it yet. So then your property, we don't say that just because the owner didn't yet have Yeush, so therefore you can't acquire it. You would have to wait until you actually pick it up. We're not going to get into how the Maharshal knows this because that's a lengthy discussion. But that's a side issue, Rav Sharaga says. But as far as we're concerned, Kevin Shahachanut Eina Mishtameret, the store is not a protected area because it's constantly got public foot traffic. Lo Shayach Lomar Bazeh Bi'isura Asaliyade Kevin De'ein Chatzero Konelo. He says you can't say that it came into the finder's possession or the store owner's possession on his property before Yeush, because a person's chatzir is not kaina. The afal pishu who omed bitzad chatzero, and even though the guy standing on the side of his chatzir, kevin shelo omar tiknali sadi lo kana, since he's unaware that the lost item is there, his field is not kaina it. Kamosha kasav maran b'shulchan aruch, as we learned the shulchan aruch that we cited above. Okay, and the gam lefi harama shein tzarach lomer tikna li chatzeri kan lo kana se bala chatzer kevin de bisur asaliyade v'haviyeyu shalom midas. And according to the Rama, where you don't have to say I want my courtyard to acquire it for me, nonetheless, if a guy is standing in his store and he says, okay, at the end of the day, I want my chatzer to be kona for me, and he thinks it. He says, you're still not, the storekeeper still will not be kaina it because there may not have been full yeush yet. So the bottom line that Rav Sharaga is trying to sort of reinforce here is that regardless of how you slice it, storekeeper does not have a valid case or an argument if he claims that my store should acquire lost objects for him. Okay, either because someone else will find it and bring it up to the cashier. that doesn't automatically mean that the storekeeper gets to keep it, because if no one ends up claiming this, then it really belongs to the finder. Or, assuming that there was Yeush, but even if the storekeeper finds it and he wants to say that my property should acquire this for me, he says there's going to be a secondary problem, which is that there may have not been full Yeush yet. The person who lost it may not have given up hope at the moment where the storekeeper said that I want my property to acquire everything for me, and there's a problem with Yeush Shalom Midas, and therefore you can't keep the lost object. Right? And remember, we learned in the laws of Hashavat Saveda that if you find something before Yeush, then you can't keep it. So what are you supposed to do? So you're really not supposed to pick it up. You're really not supposed to pick it up until the person has Yeush. If it's something that has a siman. If it's something that doesn't have a siman, I think that also you're not supposed to pick it up until you can verify that the person, or that you can reasonably assume that the person who lost it is aware of it and has had Yeush. I don't remember how we sort of categorized how you know that a person has had Yeush. I guess in every situation you have to sort of make a reasonable assessment. But the bottom line is that the person who's the balabayas of the property is not able to acquire it. Question is, does the finder, would he be allowed to keep it? Or would you say that Yeush Shalom Midas lo havi Yeush, that maybe he picked it up at a time before the person had Yeush? So it seems to me you'd have to at least make an announcement in a situation like that. You'd be obligated to make an announcement, the person who finds it, saying that I found a piece of jewelry at the local makolet on such and such a corner on such and such a date, and post a sign and let the storekeeper know. And if no one claims it within a reasonable amount of time, which is usually 30 days, then you would be allowed to keep it. I don't think that it would make a difference. I don't think that it would make a difference. But at the end of the day, if both of them want to fulfill the halacha, the storekeeper has to surrender it to the person who found it. He can't keep it for himself. Yeah, right. Right. Or they can make an arrangement that the finder says, here, I found a piece of jewelry. I'm going to hold on to it. But if someone asks you if they found a piece of jewelry, here's my business card. Have them call me, and then we'll set it up. Yeah, because otherwise the store might end up keeping it, or the cashier. Yeah, yeah.
So it's not about Bishop Sarabim, it's about years. You're finding something Bishop Sarabim, if it doesn't have a simon, you gotta keep it.
Well, this is not considered a Rishus Harabim because it is private property. Remember, it's like if someone finds something in your warehouse, right? It's you can't say that's Rishus
But
Harabim.
no one comes to my warehouse to go shopping, they go to Sobeys to go shopping, and there's
Yeah,
thousands of
but
people going
but
through. And
but even Sobeys is not technically a Rishus Harabim. But what it is private property that the public has access to. So it's yeah.
Is that governed by the number of people who have access to it? Or because I mean.
No, the fact that anyone. No, it's not a public spot because Moish at the end of the day can take an inventory of anyone who's come in and out of his store. Now, also realize that this could change halachically now that we have video cameras in all of these shopping areas. Um, although I don't know that necessarily a video camera is going to pick up who lost a ring. Yeah. Well, that's a perfect example of where this you get into a conflict between the store owner and the employee. The employee is sweeping up at the end of the day and he finds a diamond on the floor. So the storekeeper says, "Oh well, the policy of our store is that whatever you find, you have to surrender to the store at the end of the day." Yeah, well, thank you very much, but who, you know, is your policy in conformance with halacha or is it not? Just because you made that policy doesn't mean that halachically it's correct. So I don't think an employee is going to be any different from a regular customer. The fact that anyone has access to this area means that it's not something that your property will acquire for you. But I could definitely hear that, you know, say I work for Walmart and Walmart management has a policy that anything that you find has to be relinquished. They may even have a policy like that in the books. I don't know. You know, yeah. um, what I could imagine, what I could imagine is that when you sign an employment contract, you agree that even though halachically a finder is entitled to keep what lost objects, but if there's an explicit clause that one of the terms of employment is that as part of your employment compensation and your duties to your employer that you have to relinquish anything that you find to the employer, I would imagine that that would be legally binding, not because the object doesn't belong to the employee, but rather because the employee committed himself that whatever he finds, he's going to surrender to the owner. It's intellectual. Right. It's the famous story of the post-it notes, right? The story of the post-it notes is that it was invented by a guy who was working for what's the company? 3M. Yeah, he was working for 3M at the time. And even though I think there was a big legal battle that he wanted to hold on to the intellectual property rights of the, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the moral of the story is don't work for 3M or the big companies. Okay, we'll hold it here for today.